You. Okay. Okay. Oh, nice to be back in KL. So long in Australia. All right, so welcome to class number 18. And what I'm going to do is continue with the discussion on the Abhidhamma from Brother Tio's class notes. In the last class, thank you. In the last class, we talked about ultimate realities. And I grouped them into mind, body, and sense objects. Mind is, of course, consciousness and all of the cetasikas, the mental factors that go along with consciousness. Body is the physical sensations of the body. So, for example, when you go for a retreat, they say, watch the rising, falling. You're not actually watching with your eyes. And you're not actually watching rising, falling. You are experiencing the sensation of movement of the abdomen. That's really what is meant. So there is an experience of pushing, 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 pushing as the breath comes in, and then pushing, 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 pushing as the breath goes out. That is what is meant by body here. So it is things like pushing, it is things like hardness. So when walking meditation, you take a step, you feel the pushing, pushing, pushing as the foot goes up, and then pushing, pushing, pushing as the foot extends, releasing, 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 which is a form of pushing as the foot drops. And then as the foot touches the ground, there is the experience of hardness. There is the experience of warmth. Those experiences of hardness and warmth are sense objects. Right? So when we're talking about ultimate realities, that is the Vipassana meditator's perspective on the world. Now we're going to talk about concepts. Rather than things that are experienced, these are things that are thought about. And the challenge with talking about concepts is it can get quite conceptual in the discussion. So what I'm going to try and do is relate it to practice and daily life. Time. When one is time is actually a concept the mind puts on top of what is experienced. We experience one thing happening before another. We experience things happening at a certain pace. Actually, those are concepts. The concept of time is added on top of the experiences. Einstein, in his relativity, talked about things you cannot say what comes before another. Time was an illusion. And for a meditator will go in and report to the teacher there were 1 million pushes every second. Now, they don't really mean literally 1 million, and they don't really mean 1 second. But what they mean is that time works at a different pace. When there is very increased mindfulness, then there are so many more details that are seen, and it appears as though time stretches. Space is also a concept. When we're meditating, and I've had this experience very often, there is pain. Initially, it is located in, say, the knee. But very soon, as the concentration and mindfulness develops, actually the pain appears right in front of you. It's not associated with a particular location. It's just right in front of you. So that whole idea of space and location is a construct that we added on. My, me is a construct. Words. I've had this opportunity sometimes when I go on retreat. They have multiple people in one interview just to make things faster. And so when this happens, I get to listen to other yogis give their report. Some of them are less experienced in meditation than I am. Some are more experienced. And it's very interesting to listen and compare. The ones who are less experienced tend to describe things using words. The ones who are more experienced tend to just say, it was like whoosh. I mean, and the teacher will understand exactly what you're talking about, because words, they're only useful as the finger pointing to the moon. They're not the moon itself. The experience that person is describing, the whoosh, or when they say it's like getting hit by a machine gun repeatedly. None of those, they're trying just to use words to capture a experience. Ideas. What I mean by my idea, a car, and what you mean by your idea of a car can be quite different, right? My car in my head happens to be blue and yours might be red. My car is one brand, your car is another brand. So ideas are added on by the mind. But the most important one is this central concept of self. Now, we're going to get more into this a little later, but have you ever noticed that when you dream, there's always, from the first person perspective, it's always you at the center of everything that's happening, right? You're not just watching this detached. You are actually at the center of everything that is happening, because the self is so built in, such a strong habit. So here's a couple of suttas. The Buddha said, concepts are the world's designations, the world's expressions, the world's way of speaking, the world's descriptions, with which I express myself, but without grasping to them. So what the Buddha was saying is that, yes, I talk using words. I talk about people, I talk about places, I talk about events. However, that does not mean that I am attached to those people, places, or events. I don't be attached to them. So in some suttas, the Buddha used conventional language, the world's designations, the world's expressions, the world's way of speaking, the world's descriptions. And in other suttas, the Buddha moved to describing things in alternate reality terms. And if you only read the suttas where the Buddha described things in using conventional descriptions, it becomes quite confusing when you start to get into the theory, because they appear not to match. Hey, the Buddha said that he is going to be reborn. What is this he? And what does reborn really mean? That is because the Buddha was using conventional language. The Buddha said he uses conventional language to explain ideas, but he does not get attached to the ideas that are contained by those concepts. In another sutta, the Buddha said, now here the Buddha was describing how to guard the senses. And that is part of the gradual training on spiritual development, once you guard the senses. Now, you can't stop sense data from coming in. It's going to come in. Sounds are going to happen. Visual objects are going to happen. Stuff is going to happen. But one needs to guard the senses by applying mindfulness to what happens. So on seeing a form with the eye, do not grasp at its signs and features. Form here is just a small patch of color. A visual object is actually a small patch of color. Think of it like a pixel on your screen or a little dot on your TV. It's just that's all the visible form is. That form is an ultimate reality. Eye. Here we're talking about eye sensitivity. The sensitive part of the retina, the rods and cones that respond to that photon, that little dot of color. Those things are real. On seeing a form with the eye, and seeing as is consciousness, do not grasp at its signs and features. Signs in this context are things like, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that's permanent. Oh, that has, that's something to be, that I want. The features are the very specific details. Now, I'm going to give you an example from an experience that I had where briefly I was able to see a form with the eye. I was doing walking meditation and was observing what the mind was doing. And what became aware, what was obvious was that the mind would go to the eye, get a patch of color, and come back to what I described to the teacher as the center. But there's no place, but came back with that and started building on it. Then it would go get another piece of color, build, grab another piece of color, build. So it's collecting dots of color from the eye base, going back to the heart base, the center, and building up. And there was an observation that the mind was building up an image of what there was. It happened in a fraction of a second, but the mind broke it down bit by bit by bit by bit of, oh, that is another person. Oh, that is Lily Kim, happened to be Lily Kim at that time. I recognized that person. Then, oh, I like Lily Kim, he's a good guy. So initially there were form and eye. Then at the mind base, at the heart base rather, it started building up this idea of person, name of a person, Lily Kim, and he is a nice guy. All this kind of stuff started building up. There was observing how all this was happening at a fraction of a second. Okay? The Buddha then explained, if you were to leave the eye faculty unguarded, in other words, did not apply proper mindfulness, unwholesome states of attachment and aversion might invade you. So I want to point out here, there were moments of awareness where there was mindfulness. But then when it was, oh, that's a person, there's a wrong view going on right there. Oh, that's Lily Kim. There was attachment. Okay? There was a grasping all going on. So it was going back and forth between the ultimate reality of seeing the visible color of the eye and the building up the whole story and building up into the whole story. And so unwholesome state of mind of attachment and aversion did happen. But since normally in my normal day-to-day life, 99.9% of the time the mind is busy with all these thoughts, maybe at that time, only 90% of the time it was built up in those thoughts. And instead of 0.1, it's now 10%, which is a 100-fold increase. The mind was actually aware of form and I. Right? So that's an example of that's a personal experience of how experiencing the ultimate reality, the form with the I, and then how that is built upon by the mind in the mind door at the heart base to include all of the signs and features, attachment and aversion. Okay. Any question what I just covered? Yeah.
At this point, what should you do?
What did I do?
What
should I do?
Yeah.
Same as always, mindfulness. That's the answer.
So in mindfulness, then what will be the
Okay.
what will be the result when you're mindful?
If I were truly mindful at that moment, then instead of 10% mindfulness, maybe I get to 20 or 30% mindfulness, 40% mindfulness. That would be an unbelievable experience. If you're used to 0.1% mindfulness of sense experiences. Actually, I have a shirt just like this one that remember to be clearly aware. On the back, what it says is, lost in thought, come back to your senses. If you're lost in thought, come back to your senses. Because most of the time, we're thinking. That's what our mind is doing most of the time. And what the Buddha said, and what the t-shirt says, is come back to the actual sense objects. Be aware that right now, my foot is touching the floor. That's mindfulness of the sense object. Be aware that I can feel the wind from the fan. That is mindfulness of sense objects. I can feel the pressure from the wind on the fan. I can feel the temperature. So all of that is coming back to the ultimate realities, the what is truly happening right now. That when the mind is ready, as the mind gets trained and more experienced in doing that, it becomes an increasingly strong habit. Right now, 99.99% of your habit is thinking and analyzing and planning and all this kind of head stuff. If that can be reduced, if one can increase the amount of time that one is aware, truly aware of what's going on in the senses, seeing the form, the colored dots come in, and realizing that, oh, that's the eye base where they're coming in. Then, so what you do is increase mindfulness, and that will bring you back to the senses. When there is thinking, what the meditation teacher will tell you is just observe the thinking and label it. Thought, or grasping, stickiness, okay? Attachment. Whatever don't get into the content of the thought, just be aware. The mind is now going off and doing its thinking thing. There needs to be a detachment from what's going on inside the mind, that the mind can be treated as something that is observed. If you listen very carefully to the language that is being used, there is avoiding of the use of the word I or me. That's because over time, because of meditation, it's natural to say thinking arises rather than I am thinking. That there is that third party, thinking has arisen in that mind, or sensing has arisen. That is a habit that has been built up of treating as separate the activity of the mind from anything like a I think, I hear, I see. So there was no, I've seen the form of the eye. There was no, oh, I'm seeing. No, that's not what was happening in the mind. It was, oh, there's a dot. And as a result of that colored dot, there is a consciousness arising. There's a dot and there is the I. And as a result of that, there is consciousness of that arising. And as a result of that consciousness arising, the mind door is adding more details. Why is it adding more details? Because of past accumulations and history and memories, recognition of, oh, that's Lily Kim, and memories of, oh, I like Lily Kim, he's a nice guy. All of that is thoughts that are happening, but there is this detached observer, scientist perspective on it. That becomes a habit rather than getting engrossed. Like watching a TV. There's a big difference between being totally into what's happening during the TV show and being caught up what's happening and stepping back and saying, yeah, it's just a TV show. He's not really getting shot. The hero isn't really getting shot. They're not really falling in love. They're just actors reading out a script. There's a detached understanding of the reality of what's truly happening versus being sucked totally in and having the director of the TV show manipulate your emotions because that makes you want to buy things. It keeps you stuck into the show. Okay. Other questions on this one? All right. This is the Baha'ya Sutta. Baha'ya was a ascetic who heard that the Buddha was enlightened, and so he tracked down the Buddha, traveled far away, tracked down the Buddha, and the Buddha and said, "Please, Venerable Sir, give me a teaching, a short, simple teaching. Just give me the compressed version of the teaching." The Buddha said, "Look, I'm about to go on alms round. Now is not a good time." No, sir, please, Venerable Sir, please, give me a short teaching. No, I'm about to go on alms round. No, please, sir, please. Now, when the Buddha is asked 3 times, he will answer. And this is what he answered. You should train yourself thus. In the scene, there will be just the scene. In other words, there's just that colored dot. When in the scene, there is just the scene, there is no you in connection with that. There is no relationship to a self. There is no conceptual, there is no conceiving. There is perceiving of the dot, of color. But when I started saying, oh, that is Lily Kim, that is a conceiving of an idea of that is one person and I am another person. And then I like Lily Kim, he's a nice guy. That's relating that other person to me. So those are examples of putting the you in connection with the seed. So in the sutta, the Buddha said, in the scene, there will just be the seed. In the herd, there will just be the herd. In the sense, there will just be the sense. Then he said, in the cognized, there will just be the cognized. And the cognized is the most difficult thing to be separate from. The thinking, not associating and saying that, oh, I am thinking. You can say, it's perhaps not so difficult to say, oh, there is seeing without a seer. But there is thinking without a thinker. That's the tough one because people identify so much with thoughts. I am angry, right? I am angry, right? These are my opinions. Okay? So, in fact, there's a sutta where the Buddha said the difference between ascetics and lay people is lay people argue about possessions. Ascetics argue about ideas. Who owns the ideas, right? Now, there's a whole series in the Samyutta Nikaya. These are the linked discourses here. In the Samyutta Nikaya, they have a bunch of chapters, each on a different theme. And chapter 5 is the Bhikkhuni theme. So they all involve bhikkhunis. And almost all of them involve bhikkhunis going for meditation, practicing meditation, and Mara coming to disturb them. So this is Bhikkhuni Vajira, and Mara says, who created this self? Who is the master? Where is this? Can't see it. Okay. Where does it start? Where does it cease? So in the sutta, it said Mara appeared and started asking these questions. It's okay. No. Vajira replied to Mara, why do you believe there's such thing as a self? This is just a pile of conditions. You won't find a self here. So it's okay. It doesn't. So Vajira answered to Mara. Now, who is this Mara character? It is sometimes described as a deva, in one of the high celestial realms, and who wants to stop people from gaining enlightenment. So if somebody is developing themselves spiritually, Mara is going to come and mess their minds up. Actually, the way I view Mara, whenever I read about Mara is the personification of defilements. So this is one's own defilements. This is Vajira's own defilements giving this message. So it's like sometimes you've got an angel and a devil on your shoulder. This is the devil on your shoulder saying, hey, who created this thing called self? And then when that question is triggered, why do you believe there's such thing as a self? Why am I starting to think? It's just a pile of conditions. You won't find a self here. Yeah.
You mentioned Mara is the creation of own bounding self from the one day that said that I'm down.
There's two ways of looking at Mara, two ways of describing Mara in the commentaries. Actually, there's 5 ways in the commentaries, but there's 2 main ways. One is as a real deva who comes down and acts like a deva and talks with meditators. Talk to the Buddha to try and dissuade the Buddha from practicing. Try to convince the Buddha to give up his existence at the end. Disturbed all these bhikkhunis with all these questions. As a person, as a deva. That's one way of looking at Mara. Another way of looking at Mara is as a personification of defilements. In other words, it's simply a person, the imaginary being on your shoulder, whispering bad things in your ear. My personal experience is the bad things in the ear. Because sometimes thoughts pop up. You go, I'm tempted to, I'm just going to give up. I've had enough. I'm going to give up meditating right now. Who is that speaking? I don't really believe that some deva is coming down and whispering in my ear. That's my own defilements whispering in my ear, trying to get me to stop. So I label him Mara, this person who is trying to get me to say, I'm meditating. Oh, it's already been at least half an hour. 45 minutes. I gotta get up. If I don't get up soon, I'm gonna have pain in my legs. All this kind of thinking. That's Mara speaking. Now, whether you believe that that's a real deva coming down, or whether it's just the personification of defilements. So I prefer the defilements answer. So Vajira said, when the parts are assembled, we use the term chariot. So too, when aggregates are present, self is the convention we use. But it's only suffering that comes to be, lasts a while, and disappears. Nothing but suffering comes to be, nothing but suffering ceases. So these 5 aggregates, Vajira, Nikuni Vajira, is associating them with dukkha, which is exactly what the Buddha did in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta and in other suttas, saying that the 5 aggregates are suffering. And so it's not that these self exists, but it is the clinging to those 5 aggregates, which is this suffering that arises from them clinging to those 5 aggregates, that exists, that comes to be, and that's what ceases. This is a standard phrase from the suttas. Then Mara, the evil one, realizing the Nikuni Vajira knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. This is what I have found as well. I'm meditating, voice says, it's long enough, long enough. Oh, you're Mara. That's just my defilement speaking. And that's enough. Just labeling it loses its power. He goes, okay, yeah, those are just I'm not going to fall for my defilements. I'm not going to fall for those bad habits. So Mara, whenever he is recognized, disappears. Just like when you recognize those defilements, yes, they may reappear a moment later. Recognize them again. Put them under the clear spotlight of mindfulness and understanding, penetrative understanding, and they don't last. So, for example, I was doing walking meditation, right? And there was tiredness, real tiredness. Then there was, so the noting mind was tired. The noting mind that was noting the lifting, pushing, dropping was tired. But the observing mind was going, oh, there's tiredness there. The scientist mind is saying, there's tiredness there. Now, how can this happen? Because the book Abhidhamma says there's only one mind at any, not multiple minds. It felt like 2 minds, the observing mind and the noting mind. The truth is, it's alternating back and forth, back and forth. Which one gets stronger depends on which one you put more energy, more attention to. If you put more attention, more energy to, I'm tired, my home is so late, I'm meditating for 8 hours already. If that's the way the attention goes, that's the one that wins. If the observing mind, the scientist, the reporter, the newspaper reporter, the scientist going, wow, this is interesting data. Look how that tiredness is affecting everything else, though, all the other things that are going on in the mind. If that's where the energy goes, then that is wholesome, because that is with mindfulness, that is awareness of the present moment. Mindfulness of mind. Okay, that's Dhammanupassana. So this, wherever you put the energy, that's the one that grows. When you put your energy and recognize Mara as a defilement, Mara loses his power. Now, this analogy of the chariot was used a few centuries later. This is the initial introduction between King Menander and Nagasena. The king says, by what name shall I know you, sir? My friends call me Nagasena, but the name and the person to whom the name refers do not really exist. The king says that Nagasena and the person do not exist. To whom do people offer alms? And who receives these offerings? Since you receive them, you really exist. Your Majesty, did you come to this monastery on foot or by chariot? I came on chariot. Well, then what is a chariot? Is the horse the chariot? Is the wheel the chariot? Is the axle the chariot? Is the carriage the chariot? I must answer no to all your questions. Is there a thing called a chariot beside the horse, the wheel, the axle, carriage, etc.? There is no chariot beside the horse, the wheel, the axle, and the carriage. Just a combination of these things has been named a chariot. Very well, Your Majesty. You should understand Nagasena as you have understood the chariot. So Nagasena was using exact same analogy from Vajira, Bhikkhuni Vajira, regarding we only refer to a chariot because it's a collection of a wheel and an axle and a carriage and stuff like that. Similarly, we only refer to a self because it's a collection of form, consciousness, feeling, perception, and volitional formations, the 5 aggregates. So if one understands a person as being just a collection that a collection of aggregates that we have conventionally named a person, then we have correctly understood things. Okay, now I'm going to go into a little bit of biology here. The brain. Sense data comes into the brain, and this whole concept of a self is created in the brain. This has been increasingly studied by scientists. They've got incredibly powerful techniques and technologies, and I'm going to share with you the latest. Where is this thing called the self? Actually, it's not in one location. What we call the self is split between mainly four different places in the brain. Not going to try and get the medial prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is the me center that processes information about yourself. So it's like I. This is where the I lives. It's not the self, it's the I. Judging, I like this, planning, all that happens here. In the insular cortex, that's the body sensing hub. Awareness of the internal body state like hunger or breathing. Now, understand that over time, these change. When I was in Australia, my grandson is undergoing toilet training, potty training, right? At a certain age, a year ago, he didn't have this proprioception, the sense of, oh, I need to use the bathroom. And so he had to wear diapers. Now his brain has developed to the point where he's aware of what's going on in his body that, oh, now I think I need to go to the bathroom. Now I'm more hungry. So we can start doing, so the brain has adapted or grown, this part of the grown, these cortex has grown the biceps and health. So the internal body state has become more aware. Then there's the temporal parietal junction. This is the self versus other distinction. So me and Dee Kim, that's like two separate entities. That's where this thing comes in. Posterior cuboid, cortex, and precuneus. This links to memories in the self story. This adds continuity to this. This self is related to this self that was here 5 minutes ago, and 5 hours ago, and 2 weeks ago. There's this continuity. And that's done in this part of the brain. So they've analyzed that this thing called self, scientists have analyzed this thing called self is split in all these different areas. Okay, split between all these different areas, different aspects of self are in all these 4 areas. And lately, last say 10 years, they've been doing a lot of these experiments on meditators. So I'd like to share with you what happens to each of these 4 areas in meditators. So when you meditate a lot, what does it change in each of these 4 areas? Of course, this is all science, all scientifically evidence stuff. So the me center, so meditation dampens the automatic constant self-evaluation rumination. So in other words, the part of the brain that says, oh, I should have done this, or I'm not good enough, the evaluate, assessment, judgment, you're less judgmental. A meditator, that part of the brain that is the judgment section, the planning section, and because the planning section, you're off in the future, right? The judging section, you're looking at yourself and saying good or not good, or looking it up. All of this weakens. The connections, the gray matter, the connections rewire themselves in meditators so that there is less evaluation, less rumination, thinking and planning and just imagining and daydreaming. All this, less of this, naturally. The body sensing hub, this gets enhanced. Remember how I said, lost in thought, come back to your senses? Exactly. That person who meditates a lot, they have a habit of checking in with the senses more often, being much more in tune with the senses, with what's going on tactically and sensually around them. So, greater gray matter fitness enhancing the direct, non-judgmental awareness of the body's moment-to-moment sensations. This isn't thinking about what's going on. It's not, or it's being aware that, being more aware that my feet are touching the ground and the ground is warm, not judging, just being more awareness of it. So the meditators are more in touch with their senses, less distracted with evaluation, rumination, less fault finding, less daydreaming, more in touch with the physical senses. The temple Pareto junction, self versus others, changes in this area, implicating the feeling of blurring the boundary between self and environment that occurs in deep meditative states. In other words, what's good for me is good for others. There is this feeling that we're all combined. So basically, you feel, in this one, you feel at one with the universe, that everything is just interconnected. Here, posterior ciliate cortex and precuneus, linking the personal to memories, self-story, activity reduced, leading to a reduction in mind wandering, less personal narrative. So the world isn't all about me anymore. So the mind isn't distracted, less distraction, more focused. It's not all about, the world's not all about me. So these are things that they have measured in meditators. I thought this was particularly interesting, how the brain, it's called neuroplasticity, meaning it can change. So even if you were to start, if you hadn't meditated before and you were to start meditating now, your brain in these areas would have start to have measurable changes, and those measurable changes will have an effect of being less evaluation, less planning and thinking, more in touch with the senses, more of a sense of being at one with the universe, and less mind wandering and less things all focused on me. Maybe someday when I dream, I won't be in the center. I don't know. Yeah.
So, from your viewpoint, what does meditation do to health? How did meditation have such a
How does it have such an effect?
Yes.
Okay. Now, take a bodybuilder, right? Huge body muscles. Why does he have such body muscles? Because he's practiced. He's taken weights and lifted many times, not just once, not just for 10 minutes, but they've dedicated a lot of their time to building up those muscles. And they have different exercises for different muscles, right? They get all, that's how a bodybuilder sculpts this body. Meditator, yes, it's like going to a gym for the mind. You don't physically do anything, but boy, you're exercising that mindfulness. Making mindfulness continuous, using energy to make mindfulness continuous, and that continuous mindfulness allows concentration to build. That mindfulness and concentration result in penetrative understanding, wisdom, insight. And if you do it for 1 minute, certain neural pathways click together. If you do it for an hour, you reinforce those neural pathways, more and more click together. If you do it for a month or 6 months and really apply, then it has a just like the bodybuilder, and it's predictable. The bodybuilder knows if I want to build up my biceps, I do curls and it will build up my biceps. Similarly, a meditator, they know that if they apply themselves. Now, of course, if they just go on, if they're technically on retreat, but their mind is on vacation, it doesn't help, right? You got to really apply. The first one I said was energy. Energy for what? Energy for continuous mindfulness. Energy for continuous mindfulness causes concentration to build up. Energy for continuous mindfulness to allow concentration to build up gives the penetrative understanding, the wisdom, the panya, the insight of looking at seeing things as they truly are. That's how it builds up. And every minute you do that, one more drop in the bucket, and the bucket gets filled, and you end up getting a buff brain, a brain that's all super strong in all the right ways. And they can actually measure it. Different people and different types of meditation, by the way. Vipassana meditation on this one here on the sensory data. Vipassana meditators have a bigger impact on this, on the sense data, because they're much more aware of sense objects, right? The meditators who do jhanas, not so much here. They don't develop so much here. So I've given the Vipassana perspective. I could break it down to Vipassana versus jhana meditation, and they will have slightly different impacts because it's exercising different mental muscles, if you will. Okay. So it helps. And what I am recognizing is that, okay, I mean, we're all getting older. And when we were young, we thought we were immortal and we thought that we were indestructible. Now it's becoming more and more obvious that, hey, look, we need to take care of this body of ours. But even more important, I say, is taking care of this mind of ours. Building up some of these mental muscles through meditation will be useful for strengthening the important parts of the brain. Okay, next, anything else on this? So, yes, there's going to be sense data, but all that sense data that's coming in continuously, needs to be guarded. The senses need to be guarded. And the Buddha talked about mindfulness as being a guard of the mind. It's what protects unwholesome things. Now, earlier talked about Yoniso Manasikara, the wise attention. Attention is directing the mind wisely. It's about applying the mind in thoughts. What goes along here, making sure it's done properly. But if there's no mindfulness on the sense data can come in and just overwhelm the Yoniso Manasikara, the wise attention. So they need to work together. You need that mindfulness, particularly of the sense objects, and mindfulness of the thought object. That is the toughest. being aware, oh, thinking is happening without getting stuck into that thought, very difficult. So mindfulness is the guard. Separating the self from sensations. How do we in daily life separate the self from sensations and thoughts? How do we become less attached? I came up with 6 different ideas, and rather than film up on the screen, I just want to read them quickly. When we stop identifying with our thoughts and feelings, we have more presence in the moment. In other words, when we stop saying, oh, I am angry, I am hurt, we become more present in the current moment. This presence helps us experience life more fully, appreciating each moment as it is without being lost in mental noise and distraction. There's so much distraction coming in through senses and thoughts, most of it through thoughts, that take away the mindfulness of the present moment. Detachment. By seeing our thoughts and feelings as separate from who we are, we can develop calm detachment. So that helps us say, okay, yes, there is upset. It's not I am upset, but this feeling, this emotion of upset, being upset, has arisen. Taking that detached perspective, even in your language, can be very useful by not identifying it. Because when you identify it, it takes on a life of its own. I am upset. You identify with being upset, it gains a permanence. It's not just a visitor. Upset is just a visitor. It comes, it goes. Okay? So this thought, this emotion, it comes, it goes. Treat it as a visitor. Don't identify with it. Don't invite it to move in and live there. Live rent-free in the mind to say, okay, yeah, you can come in and you're upset, you're welcome. People often, some people will do this with depression. They'll invite depression in. It's not to say that we don't get depressed. Of course, everyone gets depressed from time to time, but treat it like a visitor, temporary visitor, not as a permanent resident living rent-free in the mind. When we watch our thoughts and feelings without calling them me or mine, we create space between us and our experiences. This loosens the ego's hold and helps us to see our true nature is not defined by passing thoughts or nature or emotions. When people say, oh, I'm depressed, you're identifying as depressed, right? So don't identify it as an emotion. Emotion is just a visitor. Yes, there is depression right now. It'll be over. Just like it came, you weren't always a depressed person. You won't always be a depressed person. Realizing that, witnessing the mind. By observing thoughts and sensations without attachment, we develop a clear and steady witnessing or observing mind. This awareness helps us to see how fleeting our experiences are, bringing inner peace, freedom, insight into our mental habits. We can start to say, oh, I often invite that emotion in. So you start to see your own habits and patterns as a third-party observer. Realizing that our thoughts and sensations are impermanent helps us accept change and uncertainty more easily. This understanding builds resilience and equanimity, allowing us to stay balanced amidst life's ups and downs. Now, I want to make a point here. This doesn't just apply to negative things like depression, but also things like getting overexcited. We should be more equanimous. Just realizing that, okay, yes, excitement comes, but excitement is going to go. Don't get attached. Don't identify with it, because life goes up, life goes down. Treat it as passing visitors. Enhancing compassion and empathy. Now, seeing that our thoughts and sensations are shared by all helps us to develop compassion and empathy for others. And this sense of interconnectedness encourages kindness, altruism, greater self-acceptance. So, seeing that we're all connected and that we're all facing similar kinds of challenges. Some of the stories that I've talked about, perhaps you can relate to. Well, that shows that we're all somehow connected. That can help realize that we should have compassion for others. They're having a bad day, or they're having a challenge, they're facing a challenging time in their life. Difficult. Okay. I think I'm going to go through a little bit more. Now, we think of ourselves as there is this sky, which is ourself. And floating through the sky are clouds. Most of the clouds are thoughts. 99 out of 100 clouds are thoughts, and 1 cloud out of 100 is the sensation. Okay. So, but in between, what is there between the clouds? Nothingness. There is nothing between the clouds. It's just the space between the clouds. Thoughts arise and flow away. Sensations arise and flow away. In between, there is nothing. There is no self in between any of them. Now, a simple way of being aware of all this and detached from all of this, not identifying with this, is just mindfulness, being present, calmly focusing on the body. The body is the easiest thing to be present with, being aware of the breath, being aware of the coming back to the senses. As we talked about earlier, lost in thought, come back to your senses. Labeling can be useful. Identifying it, just like when Bhikkhuni Vajira recognized, oh, I recognize you're Mara, you're playing your little game there, Mara. Recognizing it and labeling it, that is attachment going on, or that is emotion popping up. Labeling it can put a frame around it to help identify it, contain it, and become detached from it, because there's a frame around it, it can't escape. Pausing before reacting to thoughts and emotions, sensations, can be useful. And journaling. Journaling is a longer term thing where at the end of the day, you write down what you have been doing. Journaling is useful for recognizing longer term trends and habits that may not become immediately apparent on a moment by moment basis. But for example, my sister loves journaling, and she says it's really helped her go through so many challenging times in her life, because whenever she can just look back, and the whole act of journaling and reflecting back on the journaling can be quite beneficial. Okay, any questions on what we've been discussing today? These dealing with concepts, emotions, thoughts. Journaling. Okay. Journaling is a habit or practice. Okay. Think of it as the modern term for keeping a diary. All right. Where it's a habit of, on a daily basis, writing down your experiences. Think of it like keeping a diary. And Why that can be very useful is when you're dealing with things through mindfulness, labeling, and pausing before reacting, those tend to be more short term. Right now, that's what you do right now. But when there is a journaling, you can recognize longer term habits and trends, saying, oh, yeah, this is the way I tend to look at things in a fault finding way, for example. All right. So let's say, for example, somebody through mindfulness is fault finding mind, right? Mindfulness, that stops it for a moment. Labeling can stop it for a moment. Pausing before reacting can stop it for a moment. But through journaling, keeping a diary, one can recognize that, I have a habit of fault finding. I should, now, if I need to deal with that habit, how do I counteract that habit of fault finding? Maybe practicing gratitude. A practice of gratitude before I go to bed, I'm going to reflect on 3 wonderful things about my life. Okay? Just building up the counter habit as an example, right? So before you go to bed, say, I'm just going to reflect on 3 wonderful things I really cherish and value in my life. Why am I so lucky? Why would so many people trade their life for mine in a moment? Okay, what was so good? And if one gets into that habit of thinking in this, hey, I'm a lucky person, then that naturally undermines the bad habit of fault finding. As an example, I'm just as an example. We all have our own strengths and weaknesses. Identify your weaknesses through, long term, through journaling, and then figure out a strategy to address them. Any other? Okay, so somebody could read the reflection.
Thank you. Let us move on to our mind's movement. Come to the temple with the sole purpose of to study the Dharma. With full faith, sadhana, and concentration study, we learn and understand some of the Lord Buddha's teaching. Whenever there is any doubt or wrong understanding of the teaching, we seek clear our doubts and straighten our view. With a proper understanding of the Dharma, we can now put it into practice. The right understanding of the Dharma will produce right thoughts that in turn give rise to right action, right speech, and right livelihood. With such a right frame of mind, we can face the realities of life. May the merits punya be gained through listening to the Dharma, discussing of the Dharma, and straightening of views. Help us to overcoming any difficulties we may face. May all beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas or mighty powers rejoice in this merits we have acquired, and may they long protect the Buddha Sasana. May this merits be a contributing cause to the realization of Nibbana. Idate punya ipasana percayo ortu. 3 sadhus to brother Quay and brother Rock.